Do you have any idea who I am?" The question landed like a slammed door. The tablecloth trembled where the woman had rested her hand. The restaurant smelled of lemon and roasted garlic, a swirl of metallic cutlery and warm bread steam hanging in the small space between them. Overhead light glinted off the marble bar like a blade. Laughter rose in measured waves from nearby booths, and the bass of distant city traffic vibrated through the floor. Tom kept his eyes on the menu as if the paper were a map out of that room. Across from him, Claire Hudson sat immaculate in a navy dress that caught the light in hard planes. Her hair was pulled back so efficiently it read like armor. Her voice was precise and cool, the kind of voice that could turn a memo into a verdict. A phone screen flashed a red recording dot from a table at the corner. Men in suits at the next table exchanged small smirks, as if they were waiting for a performance. In the opposite chair, a small hand clutched a stubby crayon. Lily drew with fierce concentration, the tip of her tongue peeking at the corner of her mouth, entirely out of step with the tribunal of adults. When Claire said his name, it sounded like a file being closed. "Tom Alvarez," she said. Her words did not inform so much as rearrange the space between them. The promise in the room that evening was not vengeance, but an unsettling possibility that an unplanned, nearly invisible gesture could open doors that contracts and boardrooms never did. That was the first break in the script they had all expected. The evening had been sold to Tom by a single sentence in a text from Vanessa Park, Claire's assistant. "Blind date," it read, "charity fundraiser. Company will cover." Tom had laughed it off at first in the janitor's closet under the 9th floor, where he had kept his scuffed shoes and the smell of bleach lived permanently in his jacket. He worked nights, pushed a cart through marble lobbies, remembers every stain, every nick. He accepted the invite because Lily, his daughter, had been home sick, and because he thought a sit-down anywhere other than the break room might be a story to tell. Claire had RSVP'd because Marcus Chen, head of corporate partnerships, liked to make gestures that looked good on press. Neither expected the collision of two worlds to be so small and so consequential. The blind date was not blind in the sense of strangers accidentally meeting. It was designed with intent. Claire, who had grown used to controlling variables, had arranged the seating, the lighting, the menu, and the witness table. She had wanted to teach a lesson about humility. She did not expect Lily's quiet magic. Tom smelled of coffee stains and floor polish. His palms were still calloused from mops and window squeegees. He sat straight because that is what he had learned from years of passing through spaces that were not his. Claire tilted her chin and watched him with an appraisal learned from boardrooms and investor meetings. Outside the window, a taxi light bloomed and died. Lily, who had watched the first course arrive, drew a small sun on her napkin and then reached across the table without thinking. She placed the sun on Tom's plate like a gift and smiled, a simple curve that made his chest loosen. Claire noticed, and the change in her was almost imperceptible. For a beat, nothing else mattered except the small sun of crayon on porcelain and the fact that an expensive room had just been reoriented by something a child had done. In that tiny recalibration, Claire's voice lost an edge it usually carried. The phone in the corner kept recording. Tom had a talent nobody in a boardroom would name. Before he became the man who pushed a cart past executive elevators, he had been a carpenter's son who fixed broken things with patience and precision. He could read a floor like other people read a face. He could coax a splintered chair back into silence, and, more quietly, he had learned to listen. After his wife left, listening became the way he steadied Lily's nights when nightmares whispered of empty rooms. He had learned to bring small rituals to their life. He would make a cup of water and add a spoonful of sugar because the granules would catch the light and that would be a game. He could make a paper boat that never sank if you folded it just so. Those are the skills that will not feature on a resume. The ones that matter most are the soft calibrations that real people need when the world tilts. He had kept a box of cheap plastic stars in his locker, things Lily liked to trade for extra story time. On the night at the restaurant, he unfolded a napkin into a small paper star for Lily and, without planning it, slid it so it rested where her sun and his paper met. Claire watched the star catch Lily's attention, and then watched Lily look up at Tom and say a single word, almost a whisper, "Again." The recording light in the corner registered the sound. The room shifted. Claire had a backstory of her own that rarely leaked beyond the glass of her penthouse. She had been the child of a single mother who cleaned offices until dawn to keep a pair of shoes on Claire's feet for her first job interview. She learned early the vocabulary of control and the arithmetic of reputation. She went through school with the quiet hunger of someone who counted steps and outcomes. She rose quickly, not because she liked power, but because she had learned how to hold it like a shield when the world tried to make a different one. Story for her. Boardrooms became places where she could translate consequence into safety. When she sat at the head of Hudson Industries, she appointed structures and strategies that read like surgery. Yet beneath the suit, there was a daughter who had once watched her mother iron shirts until the sun rose, who kept a single faded photo of her mother in a drawer. She did not show pity in public. She measured the world in deliverables. The blind date concept had been, on paper, a small experiment in humility meant to teach her team about optics and empathy. She did not expect to see Lily's small smile rewrite the evening. The presence of a child in a room of adults was a variable she considered harmless until she realized how quickly it could rearrange her own internal ledger. The dinner scene held a quiet theater of small gestures and escalations. Dialogue moved between them with the rhythm of potential catastrophe. "Do you have children?" Claire asked, voice even. "Yes," Tom said. "One, Lily." "So this is your blind date?" Claire asked, looking at the child. "No, she came with me," Tom said. "I could not leave her." Lily hummed under her breath as she colored. "You should not have brought her," Marcus Chen said, leaning in from the next table with a laugh that was too loud for the room. "This was meant to be a proper social thing." "She's part of my life," Tom replied, steady. "Then shield it like a professional," Marcus shot back. Vanessa scolded Marcus under her breath but kept a bright smile for the cameras. "I pay for tables," Marcus said. "We get to be particular." Claire watched, the knife in her hand catching the light. She had planned to teach Tom a lesson about social boundaries. Instead, she found herself watching Lily trade a crayon for a napkin star and whisper exactly what a father would hope to hear. Again. Claire felt something unplanned press against the hard lines of her day. For the first time in years, she considered that a gesture without market value could still be precious. At 33% into their unscripted night, when the child's smile had first opened the room, and before the world outside could replay the recording for its own hungry commentary, the story pauses for a moment that matters to everyone watching at home. If you are feeling a knot in your chest now, know that you are not alone. This scene is the kind that makes people stop their scrolling and breathe. Tell us one word in the comments that captures what you felt at that exact second. Was it hope, anger, joy, surprise, betrayal? Leave that word below and help others find someone who feels like them. Your single word makes this space smaller and braver. It tells us whether you came here to watch a fall or to witness a repair. It helps other viewers find support and lets us know what kinds of stories you need next. And now we go back to that night when a tiny paper star changed the course of more than one life. After the restaurant, the sequence of events accelerated in ways that felt both inevitable and cruel. Claire left with an ambiguous expression and a note in her phone. Marcus's laughter was a soundtrack to the lobby. Vanessa attempted to smooth the edges, but her texts were already full of strategy.
A week later, a short viral clip began to circulate. A 3-second phone recording from that corner table showing a woman leaning in, a red dot blinking, and a small girl whispering a single, clear word. The comment threads filled with judgment before context arrived. Some called the scene staged. Others cautioned about privacy. The word social experiment trended. Tom, who kept his phone for emergencies, did not understand the fastness of public opinion. He understood the slow work. Lily's speech therapist appointments, the bus line to the clinic, the extra shift that paid for tests. He had not bargained for becoming the face of some viral moral debate. He was a man who swept floors in the night and told stories at bedside when nightmares came. He found himself up early the morning a complaint landed on his supervisor's desk. An item had gone missing from the CEO's office. Something small, something that by itself was negligible, but in the context of a growing narrative of impropriety, it glittered like evidence. The security footage that mattered had a gap. Someone had tampered with the recording schedule in the system. Security Chief Elliot Graves found an anomaly and logged it with cold efficiency. "We lost footage between 1 and 3 in the morning," he told his superior. Officer Ramirez later would write a report that used the word opportunity as if it were a neutral noun. Tom was pulled into a room that smelled of stale coffee and fluorescent light. The office's concrete voice made everything sound final. "We have a missing item," said Nora Singh, who had been brought in as a consultant to advise on the public relations side, though she was a licensed child psychologist in the community outreach program. That does not mean anything until it is proven. The words were procedural, but they did not cut the same as the handcuffs when they closed. "We need to take a statement," Officer Ramirez said. "You were one of the only ones," Elliot said. "I was the one who cleaned, yes," Tom said. "I always clean. I was there nights. People leave things all the time." His voice had the plainness of people who have to be literal. "We have to be thorough," Vanessa said, her face still glossy from camera lights. "Tom, we just need honesty," Claire said finally, and for the first time she sounded smaller than the power she wore. "I am being honest." But the legal machinery
moves differently than moral observation. An item had been placed under a conference chair with fingerprints that could be contested. A witness statement had been hurried. The night swirled into booking paperwork and the word precaution appeared in a press release. Tom was taken into custody for questioning while Lily waited at home with a neighbor who had promised to bring cereal and cartoons. The scene of his arrest was textbook cruel in its humdrum detail. Fluorescent light, clicking paperwork, the echo of shoes on linoleum. The frame-up was built on a small edifice of convenience. Marcus had rallied whispers about security and image. Someone with access to the security server had created a new user and altered one file. The software, central to the building's monitoring, had an automatic overwrite policy of 30 days that erased raw footage unless flagged. The altered file wiped a segment where a cleaning cart would have been visible. Security logs showed an entry that did not match any known ID. Elliot's team, under pressure to protect the company's reputation, moved fast and supplied a timeline that fit neatly into a narrative of theft. Nora, who kept her clinical objectivity, watched these events with attention that tugged at her ethical center. "We cannot allow a man to be found guilty by tweet," she told Vanessa in a whisper. "But tweets have volume and a way of making listeners forget the nuance that sits in offices." Tom's phone showed calls from a number he did not recognize, a lawyer he would not afford, offers of help from strangers who wanted to expose the truth. The city newsroom asked for statements. Marcus called for a quick internal resolution. Claire sent instructions to PR that read like surgical notes. The investigation that followed was a discreet choreography of technicians, timestamps, and metadata. Forensic analysts pulled a 3-step process to secure evidence. First, they preserved raw files using a read-only clone to prevent further alteration. Then they ran a hash verification to compare file integrity against archived backups.
Finally, they reviewed user access logs and correlated IP addresses with timestamps to locate anomalous sessions. The key numbers were simple and precise. A missing 000427 to 020311 segment corresponded to the 30-minute gap where the cleaning cart route would have been visible. 3 network access entries appeared at 014205 from an unregistered terminal. That pattern suggested manual tampering. The chain of custody documents were updated and sealed with signatures and timestamps to maintain legal validity. The sequence of digital footprints would later be the hinge of the case. While Tom sat in a holding room and Lily pressed a crayon to paper at home, Claire found herself pulled in 2 directions she had not expected. Part of her wanted the tidy finish of a boardroom, a narrative that would affirm the lesson she thought she was delivering about boundaries. Another, the one
that remembered a mother ironing Dawn's shirts, felt the unbidden tug of responsibility. After the initial shock, she visited the precinct. She was careful with her words. "I arranged the evening," she said to Officer Ramirez, "but only because we were making a point about empathy." "We need to follow the evidence," he said. "The evidence will do what it does." But how evidence is gathered is not the same as how reputation is applied. Vanessa, always a strategist, whispered that a clear public statement denying malice could control damage. Marcus, at a private table, sent a message to Claire that read like a press release. The board called for discretion. Nora suggested a neutral third-party review of the security systems. Claire did not sleep. At night, the penthouse felt too large, the silence of a successful life sounding like a space that could hold more than she had intended to contain. The case gained momentum. A forensic sweep turned up a pattern of user activity that did not belong to any company employee. An access point was traced to a temporary contractor account registered under a shell firm used for IT upgrades. The contractor had been on site the week prior. The IP trail led to a coffee shop 5 blocks away and a name that nobody initially recognized. Elliot ran his own check and found a discrepancy with a maintenance key log. A camera on a service stair had been offline under a maintenance request labeled calibration. The more the data was assembled, the more the neat narrative began to fray. Marcus began to feel pressure. He had not intended a man to be arrested. He had intended a public lesson. The hand of escalation had taken over. Tom's lawyer, a district attorney named Maya Torres, who did pro bono criminal defense work when she could, began demanding the raw footage and user logs. Nora began speaking in public meetings about the importance of not allowing child cases to be weaponized, and that language found its way into the community groups forming around Tom's name. There were moments when the tension grew so taut that everyone in the story found themselves leaning towards some new truth. One of those moments came in a town hall meeting called by Hudson Industries to address the controversy. The room smelled of paper and citrus cleaner. Cameras were set up like an audience of lighthouses. Claire arrived and took the podium in a way that was designed to be competent. The board prepared statements. Marcus positioned himself with an air of contrition that was thin and practiced. Tom attended because his lawyer insisted that public presence matters when reputation is currency. Lily sat in the back with a volunteer from a community center named David, who had a quiet laugh and an old sweater. The town hall began with anodyne phrasing, and then, through a series of questions from staff and community members, arrived at the one issue who was responsible for the tampered footage and who would take responsibility for the human consequences of that tampering. "We will get to the bottom of this," Claire began. Her voice was clear. "We owe that to Tom and to all of you." The phrasing was correct, but the room felt like a stage set for a reveal. When the forensic team presented the sequence of logs and IP correlations, the name that surfaced was Marcus Chen's minor contractor contact. The user account matched an email which traced back to a vendor retiree who had been contracted indirectly. The boardroom air changed. Marcus had coached the narrative about image and audience and had not anticipated that his casual conversation about optics could involve someone willing to tamper with footage. There was a moment when Claire stepped back from the podium and looked at Tom in the audience. She saw the man who smelled of floor polish and who had a daughter who spoke in small miracles. She saw the ledger of power and how it had been used. Then she did something that no one in the room had scripted. She asked for the raw file to be played. The small red light of the camera in the corner caught the moment as they hit play. The screen showed fragments of the lobby at night, a cleaning cart passing, a shadow of someone tying a knot in a cable. Then the footage resumed where the gap had been. In the crucial seconds, a figure appears briefly in a jacket and a cap, someone who had not been part of the company staff list, someone whose hands moved with purpose. The room held its breath. Vanessa forgot her smile. Marcus looked like a man who had accidentally set a room on fire and now watched it burn. Claire's voice, when she spoke next, did not sound like a memo. It sounded like a person who had discovered a mistake with direct human consequences. The public reveal was a reversal in the purest sense. Claire stood and addressed the room with something raw in her throat. "This was wrong," she said simply. "We used performance as a lesson. We made a person the subject of a spectacle. That is my responsibility." She then did something that the internet had not predicted. She told the story of her mother ironing shirts, how power had been a shield made necessary by fear. She acknowledged with careful sentences that empathy could not be staged. "I am sorry," she said, "not because it might look good, but because I caused harm." The apology moved people because it came from someone who had the power to make a press release, but instead chose a personal admission. The applause at the end of her words was tentative, then genuine. Tom was released that afternoon when the DA accepted charges would not stand without further evidence, and the company agreed to open an independent probe into who had altered the footage. There remained a need for repair beyond legal exoneration. Nora, the psychologist, arranged for Lily to have expanded speech therapy through a community partnership. Maya, Tom's attorney, proposed a restorative program that would include company-funded counseling and a vocational stipend. Claire convened a new project team and, in a move that stunned even her more cynical board members, proposed a foundation to fund early childhood therapeutic programs that would be rooted in real community partnerships rather than performative PR. The proposal was technical in its requirements and clear in its aims. It specified a 3-year pilot, an annual audit, and an open grant process for nonprofits with measurable outcomes. It proposed that 1% of executive compensation be redirected to the fund. The program would be called the Quiet Repair Initiative, and its first threshold would be to create space for children like Lily to have consistent therapeutic access without the stigma of charity optics. Those plans were signed, budgets allocated, and procedural timelines set. The foundation required a governance structure, a board with independent members, quarterly impact reports, and a publicly accessible grants portal. The process language mattered as much as the sentiment because it translated an apology into actual scaffolding. There were smaller human stitches that mattered too. Tom was offered a chair on the foundation's advisory board, not because he was an executive, but because he had navigated harm and could speak to the human consequences of corporate spectacle. He accepted with a humility that did not try to perform strength. "I do not want to be a symbol," he said in an early meeting. "I want to make sure Lily gets help and that other kids do too." Claire met him after one meeting in the company's small cafeteria, where the coffee tasted faintly of burnt syrup. "I owe you more than a program," she said. And Tom saw something like regret and something like the germ of a new motivation. The two of them began to meet in small bursts, sometimes to talk about budgets and sometimes to swap stories about how to get a child to try a new food. Those mundane exchanges were the quiet work of trust.
Around them, secondary characters continued to act and shape the arc. Vanessa kept the calendars and the damage control. Elliot upgraded their camera protocols with detailed redundancy. Marcus, chastened, underwent ethics training and withdrew from public-facing roles. Nora published a piece about the dangers of performative empathy and the need for real systems to support child development. There were moments of deep tension that could have unstitched everything. One came when a leaked memo suggested that Claire had considered a PR push that would pay Tom for participation. The memo itself was a fragment, stripped of context, and it ricocheted through social channels with renewed ferocity. 2 paragraphs in a local paper accused the company of calculating apology. Tom,
He called Claire and felt old anger rise. He called Claire and asked a blunt question. "Is any of this real to you?" he asked. Claire listened and then responded without slides or rehearsed lines. "I messed up," she said, "but I want to do the work, not for optics, for repair." That exchange, raw and uneven, carried more weight than any press conference. It was a reminder that institutional repair requires private humility. A similar moment came when someone from the board tried to sink the foundation proposal, citing risk. It took a painful 3-hour session and specific legal assurances to push the proposal back to the agenda. The last stretch of tension came when the contractor who had tampered with footage was named and then arrested for a separate fraud. The revelation exposed the mess of motivations that multiply when reputation becomes a commodity. Among the procedural descriptions must be a short technical note about how the company reconfigured its surveillance oversight. They adopted a 2-person verification for any footage edits, implemented immutable logs with time-stamped cryptographic signatures, and established a retention policy of 90 days for raw security data. Access control lists were tightened, and a third-party auditor was appointed to review any administrative overrides. These steps addressed the immediate procedural failure and created a chain of accountability that could be audited externally every quarter. The epilogue unfolds in 3 clear moments that show the slow consolidation of repair. 1 month later, the Foundation's pilot grants had been approved for 2 local clinics. Lily was attending speech therapy twice a week. Tom had a steady schedule that allowed him time off for appointments. The city's small newspaper ran a short piece about Claire's apology and the Foundation's first disbursements. The piece quoted a speech therapist named Nora saying that what mattered most was continuity of care. Claire walked through a clinic room painted in soft blue and watched a child place blocks in deliberate order. She wrote a memo to her board about transparency. Marcus resigned from his public role and entered a private accountability program. There was no triumphant music, only small steps. 3 months in, the Quiet Repair Initiative awarded its first community grant to a neighborhood center run by Maya Torres and David. The grant paid for extended therapy slots, mobile speech clinics, and a training program for volunteers to provide respite care for single parents. Tom had begun speaking at local events about the dignity of work and the importance of steady benefits. Claire and Tom recorded a short video together about the need for corporate accountability that was used at a symposium on ethical leadership. The video closed with Claire saying plainly, "Power is a tool, not a shield." Public opinion had cooled into a more nuanced debate about systems and human cost. The Foundation published its first quarterly report and put its bylaws online for anyone to read. 6 months later, a small event at the community center felt like a quiet celebration. Lily stood on a little stage with children and recited a poem she had learned. Her voice was not loud, but it was clearer than it had been in a year. Tom watched with tearful eyes and clapped like someone who had been taught to hold himself together at inconvenient times. Claire arrived with coffee and sandwiches and stayed long enough to help clear up and carry a folding chair out to a car. The Foundation had hired 2 therapists full-time, and a case manager named Nora coordinated client schedules. The company had instituted a permanent fund and a new access control policy for security. Marcus spoke once at a closed ethics seminar about the dangers of optics without conscience. He did not return to public life. The community felt a measurable change. People who needed therapy had access. One child who had been on a waiting list got the care they needed. The exoneration of Tom was not a cinematic return to normal, but a careful rebuilding of life. The story closes with a short, plain truth that the characters had arrived at by different routes. Tom did not seek fame. He wanted a work schedule that honored his father's calluses and a program that meant Lily would not have to wait for a spot in therapy. Claire did not seek absolution. She wanted to remake how her company used the power it wielded. They both understood that kindness without structure is fragile and that structures without humility are cruel. The foundation continues to operate, and the company continues to report quarterly for transparency. One evening, months after the town hall, Claire and Tom stood outside the community center under a sodium lamp and watched children run in a small courtyard. Tom handed Claire a paper star he had folded from a page of meeting notes. She accepted it with both hands. "Thank you," she said, "for teaching me how to listen." He shrugged, an old world of manners visible in his movement. "You taught me how to stand in places I thought I could not," he replied. The last line of the story is small and true. When someone risks being gentle in a world that prizes spectacle, the world sometimes bends to meet them. If you want to follow how the Quiet Repair Initiative grows and to see stories like Tom and Lily's, subscribe to the channel for updates and stories of everyday repair.